Hey everyone, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So today I have a pretty interesting video for you. So somebody a few weeks ago posted on Reddit and said basically, I don't know what to do with my RG350. I can't get it to work. I'm about to give up on it. Can somebody help me out? And he just had a lot of issues. And so I said, hey, send it to me, just pay for the shipping and I'll take a look at it and I'll see what I can do and I'll fix it up and I'll send it back to you. So that's what this video is going to be. He allowed me to videotape the whole process. And so I'm going to show you what he did on the device itself, at least what I can figure out, and then we'll kind of work it from there. So you can see here, it's an RG350 model. It's definitely seen better days. It's a little beat up. It's missing the thumb grips on the analog sticks. It has a 128 gig Samsung card inside, but what I learned is this card is actually corrupted. So even though you could save files onto it, you couldn't actually load them. So it was having issues. So we have to replace that. And we're going to take a look at the inside as well and see how that works. But for now, let's actually start it up and we'll see what kind of firmware we're dealing with. What does the software look like? What kind of apps has he installed? So you can see right off the bat, he had the Rogue edition of RG350's firmware, which I'm not a big fan of this one. It always seems to cause issues. I've never really found any stability with it on my own devices. So I recommended to him that I was going to reflash this and use stock firmware and just soup it up for him. And so you can see here, he has several OPKs installed. Some of them are redundant. And so we'll look through and see exactly what's going on when we FTP into the device. But you can see now it's pretty bare bones. It has a lot of the pre-installed games on it, but nothing really additional other than that. And there are some emulators like we saw earlier. All right, so let's power this down and let's actually look inside and open it up. Okay, so right off the bat, you can see that it's using the original SD card that came with it. I'm not a fan of these original cards. I found them to have a lot of issues and whatnot. So just to be safe, we're going to replace that 16 gigabyte card with a more reputable brand. Otherwise, everything seems to be okay. I don't see any issues altogether with the device itself. I do see that the analog sticks are a little bit wobbly, and I tried to work on those, but unfortunately, there's just no fix to it. It's just got a little bit of wobbliness into them, so there's no way to tighten that up, unfortunately. Okay, so like I mentioned, I want to replace this with a new SD card here. So I'm just going to use this SanDisk card here. I'll have a link to all the tools that I'll use below, just so you can follow along if you are doing the same to your own device. Okay, so let's put it together and let's actually look at the cards inside through the FTP client. So to log into FTP, it's pretty easy. Just use an FTP client, use the IP address of 10.1.1.2, and then root as the username, no password. And I have guides for all of this down below. Just look for my firmware guide or my connection guide. They're all in there. Okay, so first things first, I'm jumping into the SD card and having a look. And I can see already that there are some issues. So for example, I see a Dreamcast folder, which is definitely something that doesn't work on this device. And overall, when I open up, say, the Game Boy folder like this, I can see that there's zip files. And a lot of the emulators won't do zip files very well. They need to be unzipped. So that's an initial issue. So going into the app side on the internal card, I can see that there are a bunch of OPKs that have been added, but it doesn't look like any have been deleted or anything. But I can see some redundancies there. Just overall, it's a little bit messy in here, so we'll clean this up as well. And then something that caught my eye up above is I could see that there was a SimpleMenu folder, and I could see there he actually just put the installer files in there. And same with this. This is actually a Windows program that's been installed on, not even installed, it's just been put on the RG350. So that's an issue right there, is that potentially this person was putting on exe files and other files thinking they would work on the RG350 when obviously only OPKs work. And so that's one of the issues there that I'm finding. Okay, so let's actually install new firmware on that new 16 gigabyte SD card. So first things first, we're going to go to my guides, and right here I have my firmware guide, and you'll see I have a section that says start over from scratch, and that's where we're going to go. So in this section, I have links directly to the firmwares that you want, the base firmware. So I'm just going to download and install the base 350 firmware, which is 1.5. And we'll need to upgrade this to 1.5.1 in order to get HDMI working. But for now, we're just going to do the 1.5. So once that's downloaded, we're going to open up Win32 Disk Imager. And then we're going to find that image we just downloaded, which is the base 1.5 firmware. And then we're just going to write it directly to the card. And that's it. No need to reformat or anything else like that. It takes care of all that for you. Okay, so now it's been installed onto the card, but we need to resize the partition. This is just a quirk with all the Linux file systems. You have to do this. So go into the app called Disk Genius, open that up. And then in here, you're going to want to find the card and then the primary or the one partition. So go in here and you can see that it's only taking up about 500 megs when you do have about 14 gigs available. So right click, expand the partition, and then hit start. Okay, so now you're taking advantage of the entire 16 gigabytes that are on that card. Okay, so next thing is we need to replace that. So I already opened it up, put the card in there, and now I'm getting rid of that other card. We're not going to need it. We can save it as a backup. I'm going to send it back to him when I send everything else over. But for now, we don't need to get inside this device anymore. We have the firmware flashed, nice and safe. We can do everything through FTP from here on out. So now I'm just going to close it back up. Okay, so now that we have that internal card all squared away and we're good to go, let's look at the external card. So first things first, I saw that the person had a lot of ROMs already installed in the external card. And like I mentioned before, this card is corrupted. And so I'm going to take the data that I can off of it, but I'm going to use a new 128 gig card afterwards. So first things first, I'm going to look in here. I see a lot of dot files. So there's like a dot and then the file name itself. That means that he was using a Mac to do all of that. And that doesn't really mean anything other than that, but that's just something I observed. You can see, obviously, those Dreamcast games aren't going to work, but these Game Boy games will probably work after they've been unzipped. And there are some emulators that actually do work with zip files, but I found they are a little bit more sluggish, take a little bit longer, and I just don't think it's worth that saved extra space. So I usually recommend everybody, unless the emulator requires it, to unzip your files first. So we're going to do that with these Game Boy games. Okay, so digging a little deeper, I'm opening up some of these MAME folders. I'm finding more exe files. So it looks like this person downloaded Windows apps and then tried to put them on their RG350, and it's just not compatible. It's a completely different file system and infrastructure and everything else. So I can understand why they were probably frustrated when they were trying to install things that weren't going to work on the device. Okay, so I figured out that these are the systems that I want to actually save and try to move those games over to the new disk. So I'm just moving them over to my computer, and then we'll reformat the card and we'll work it from there. Okay, so now let's prepare the 128 gig card, the new one. Now, first things first, it has to be formatted for FAT32. That's actually what the RG350 recognizes. So you need to use a special program called the FAT32 formatter. And I'll have a link for this below as well. So all you have to do is just go in and reformat the card this way. And I'm changing the name to RG350 just because it's a lot easier to recognize and know. Okay, that's it. It just takes a second. All right, so now that we have this card all set up, let's actually build out the file system. So first things first, we're going to make a folder called ROMs. We're also going to make one called apps. You don't actually have to put any apps on the external card. You can put them all on the internal card, but I like to just have that available as an option. So open up that ROMs folder, and then you're going to want to make more folders for all of the different systems. And so I'm using the emulec, or the emulation station file system, which is basically all lowercase, and it's just very simple. It's all a single word for the most part. So I'm just going through here and creating folders for all of the systems that I think he's going to want. And so I'm putting them all in here, all lowercase, and then I'm just running through this table just to make sure that everything makes sense. Okay, so next thing is I want to download and install the new OPKs, the new emulators that are going to work best for this device. So I'm going to my own website here, and I have them all listed here of the most recent emulators for any of the systems that you want to play. So I'm just going through one by one and downloading them. And it's going to take a while. You kind of have to read through and figure out, okay, is this the best OPK, or is this the same as the one I had before? In general, I'm just kind of replacing every single one of them with these downloaded ones. Even if the previous ones are actually the same emulator, I'm still just going through and doing it myself. Okay, so once that's done, then you're going to need to unzip all of these. And so you just go in and I do extract here, and they all pop up, and then I delete the zip files. And so I'm left with a bunch of OPKs at this point. So at this point, I'm going to go through the internal SD card and look at all the OPKs that are already installed, and I'm going to delete a bunch, any of those that are redundant. So for example, I know I'm going to put in a new Game Boy emulator, the Gambat one. So I'm going to delete the old one, and so I'm just going to do that ahead of time so that way I don't get confused. And then once I have them deleted, I'll just move the new ones in. And there we go. So I'm just going to rinse and repeat. This was only for the console section, but I'm also going to go through the home computers and the arcade versions and everything else, and I'll go through and download them. For example, here with ScumVM, which I know the person that sent it to me mentioned that they wanted to have this up and running. So I'm going to get this up and running for them as well. Okay, so now that I've moved all the OPKs over, we're going to do the next thing, which is to update the firmware to the point where it's going to work exactly how we want. So first things first, I have to run the update program to get it from 1.5.0 to 1.5.1. And so I just ran that right now. I have links to this in my firmware guide. And this is going to allow me to install the HDMI update, which is going to be the next thing I'm going to install here. And you can see here it's showing October 27th, which means it's the 1.5.1 version. All right, so now I'm going to do the HDMI update. This is the 1.1 beta. You can see it's dated from May 10th, so that's the most recent one. Okay, everything went okay. Now, one thing I forgot about the 1.1 beta is on the RG350 specifically, it removes all the text from the icons in the menu, which is really unfortunate. And so the best way to actually fix this is to go back to 1.0 beta. And so I had forgotten about this. It's been a few months since I tried this, so I have to go back to square one. And basically, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is reset the device and then hold down X and Y, and then it'll actually reboot to the last known working firmware. And so no issues there. I just rebooted it, held the X and Y, and then now I'm installing the 1.0 beta right now. Okay, and there we are. So the only thing I don't like about this 1.0 HDMI beta, unfortunately, is that it actually makes the text a little bit bigger. And so it's kind of weird looking, but honestly, we're going to be using SimpleMenu as the main interface when we're done here, so it's not really going to matter that much. Okay, so let's get HDMI going. So first things first, you need a capture card. So I just have this cheap $20 one that I really like, and it actually works really well with the RG350. I've tried more expensive capture cards, and they actually perform worse. So I really like this one. And then you're also going to need a mini HDMI to HDMI cable. So once that's plugged in and you've plugged it into your computer or into your monitor or whatever you're going to use to display with, you have to go in and actually turn HDMI on. Once it's on, then you're able to see it. Unfortunately for the 350 and as well as the 350p, it's very difficult to get the audio to work for some reason. I'm not really sure why it is that way, and hopefully someday they'll have a fix for it, but for right now, I couldn't actually get any of the audio to work. Okay, so now I'm just going through all the different systems and just double checking that they're all going to boot. And then I'm also going into the settings, making sure that hardware scaling is enabled for those that allow it. That gives you a nice crisper picture. And you know, we're working with the 350 here, so it's not like the most high-res screen in the world. It's a 320 by 240, but at the same time, I want to get every pixel to count. So I'm just going through now and testing different games. You can see here this is Bad Dudes, and obviously I want to check to make sure whether or not Ronnie has been kidnapped by ninjas. So checking that out, and then I'm going through, you know, we'll do Neo Geo next, and we'll check out some other systems. Okay, so here's PS1. PS1 seems to work just fine, so that's great. Here's 32X Virtua Fighter running very, very smoothly. And then Super Nintendo, so this is Pocket SNES and it's working just fine. Okay, here's Game Boy Advance. This is a James Bond game and it's working good. I am actually using scale 2X for this in particular for the hardware scaling because it seems to look the best that way. And then trying out some ScumVM games, they all seem to work just fine. And then he had also mentioned that he wanted to try out some Game & Watch games, and so I added that emulator on there as well. And then finally I went in and I installed the beta version of Xmame, which has MAME for All 2, as well as the 84 version of Xmame, and I think they're both really great. And I tested them and they all work fine. Alright, so now that we know all the games work okay and the emulators are working fine, let's actually scrape them to get all the box art so that we can use that in SimpleMenu. So we're going to use an app called Scraper with a K. And we're going to go in here, we're just going to select the folder. I'm actually plugging in the card, so I'm actually going to scrape this directly onto the card itself. So it detected all the systems that are on the SD card. I'm hitting next here. And that's it. Now we've built out our system menu, and we'll go and update each of these one by one. We're only going to do the NES right now just to make sure you know how to do this. First thing, under the games list, I like to change it to say no backup. And then under media, I like to get rid of this internal mix one. And then under this image, I change it from box 3D to box 2D. I think that one looks the best. And then you want to make sure your output folder is changed to just the media folder. If you add the images one, it's not going to work. Everything else I keep the same, and that's really it. So now I'm just going to grab the NES section, and then I'm going to hit play, and it's going to go and it's going to scrape one box art for every single game that's out there. And this is a pretty large NES collection. You can see here it's something like 400 games altogether. And so because of that, it takes a while. This took about 20 minutes altogether. Okay, that's it. So once it's done, you can go and you can exit out of it. You can do another system and so on and so forth. All right, so now let's actually install SimpleMenu. So again, we're going back to my website, going to my SimpleMenu guide. We're going to install and download the OPK for SimpleMenu. And I'm just dragging it over to the Media Data Apps folder like you do with any other OPK. And then you need to start up the OPK just one time and it'll crash, and that'll create all the folders you need. So I'm going into the actual home menu, into the SimpleMenu folder, and I'm grabbing all of the different section groups. So you can see here, this is the console section group. And in here has all the data that we need to point it to the right place. So first things first, I want to make sure that the OPKs are the correct one. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going to my apps folder and I'm checking the difference in the names for each of these. So for example, with the NES emulator, I'm just copying the name and then I'm pasting that name in. And I'm going to just keep going down the line and I'm going to fill them all in from all those different apps. Okay, so once that's done, I want to make sure my console list is correct. So I'm going to basically only have the specific consoles I want displayed showing up in that line. That first line with the hashtag is just a placeholder for me, but I'm going to delete everything else that I don't want showing up in SimpleMenu. Okay, next thing, I need to change the actual path of all the ROMs. So if you remember, I actually changed the name of my SD card to RG350. So I'm going through and I'm changing all these from SD card to RG350. That way it's pointing to the specific place where all these ROMs are being held. And finally, I also need to change the folder names themselves. Like I mentioned, they're all lowercase, so I need to go through and change them to match what's actually in my external SD card. Okay, and here we are. We're now in SimpleMenu, and that's really basically it. You know, I have whole guides for all these little things, but I just wanted to show you the things that I went through in order to figure out how to make things work for this person. In general, the things I looked for, I went with the external side first, looked at all the hardware, then I went into the internals, I looked at the internal SD card, then the external SD card, and then I just kind of cleaned everything up based on his wishes and installed all of the emulators that he was hoping for based on the ROMs that he had already installed. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Happy gaming.